Welcome to this explainer. Okay, think about your daily life for just a second. We're born into organizations, right? Like hospitals. We're educated through organizations, like schools and universities. And let's face it, most of us are going to spend the vast majority of our adult lives working inside of organizations. But have you ever actually stopped to think about how these invisible structures are designed? Well, over the next few minutes, we're going to trace a pretty fascinating journey. We'll explore how our understanding of the workplace has radically evolved over the last century, shifting from viewing organizations as these rigid, unfeeling machines to understanding them as highly dynamic, living ecosystems. All right, let's dive right into this. To grasp how modern workplaces operate, here's our roadmap. First, we'll hit the core concepts. Second, classical theory, where the workplace was literally treated like a machine. Third, the human focus of the neoclassical era. Fourth, the modern theory of dynamic systems. And finally, the contemporary issues we're dealing with today.
Starting us off, Section 1, Core Concepts and Principles.
Now, before we go back in time, we gotta ask, what actually makes an organization an organization? And why is its underlying structure so absolutely crucial to whether it succeeds or fails? Let's look at this widely accepted definition by Robbins. He defines it as a consciously coordinated social entity with a relatively identifiable boundary that functions on a relatively continuous basis to achieve a common goal. The absolute key word here, consciously. You see, an organization isn't just a random group of people who happen to be hanging out in the same room. It's a deliberately designed structure where activities and responsibilities are intentionally grouped together to hit a very specific, predetermined target. It's built for a purpose.
And if you're wondering, well, why should I care about this structure stuff? This quote by management legend Peter Drucker brilliantly illustrates the stakes. He said, a poor organization structure makes good performance impossible, regardless of individual capabilities. Think about that for a second. You could hire a dream team, right? A team made up entirely of the smartest, most talented individuals on the planet. But if the structure they're placed in is flawed, if the lines of communication are broken, or if the division of work is just a chaotic mess, they're going to fail. A sound organizational structure is literally the prerequisite for success.
So, take a second and picture how these core principles show up in your own daily workplace. You've got a group of people, obviously, but then you have a division of work. People assign specific tasks based on what they're good at. You have a common purpose uniting everyone. You've got horizontal and vertical relationships, meaning how different departments interact, and how managers interact with their teams. You have a clear chain of command dictating authority. And finally, you have the dynamics of the organization itself, the human sentiments, the attitudes, and the behaviors that really bring the whole thing to life.
Moving right along to Section 2, Classical Theory, the Machine.
Okay, so now that we know what an organization is, how did early management theorists try to optimize it? We're stepping back into an era heavily influenced by the Industrial Revolution, where people were absolutely obsessed with rules, order, and maximum efficiency. Between 1900 and 1950, the classical era dominated. This is where the foundation was laid, viewing the organization strictly as a mechanistic structure. As time progressed into the mid-20th century, theorists realized, hey, this is incomplete, which ushered in the neoclassical era, focusing heavily on human relations. And finally, by the late 20th century, the modern era emerged, viewing organizations as complex ecosystems. Let's unpack that first classical block. The classical era was driven by three main streams of thought. First, you had Max Weber, who developed the concept of bureaucracy, emphasizing a system of strict rules, clear hierarchies, and absolute precision. Next, Henri Fayol introduced administrative theory, focusing on the actual principles and processes of management itself. And finally, F.W. Taylor brought us scientific management, which basically sought the single most scientifically efficient way to perform any given task. What's really interesting about this is the underlying assumption across all three streams. They all viewed the organization as a machine, and the workers inside it? Well, they were just seen as highly controlled, interchangeable cogs driven entirely by basic economic needs.
Which brings us to Section 3, Neoclassical Theory, and the shift to a human focus.
Yeah, as you can probably guess, treating human beings like literal unfeeling robots eventually caused some major problems, and this led to a massive pivot in the mid-20th century, giving rise to the human relations movement. Theorists suddenly woke up and realized, wait a minute, workers are complex, emotional beings. The shift here is incredibly stark. Classical theory assumed workers were strictly rational and motivated only by money within this rigid, formal structure. But the neoclassical theory, spearheaded by thinkers like Elton Mayo, completely flipped the script. He introduced the concept of the social man.
Mayo proved that workers are actually driven by social needs, by emotions, and by the desire for rewarding relationships on the job. The neoclassical view basically argued that recognizing human dignity, fostering real communication, and understanding informal workplace networks, that's the true cornerstone of efficient management.
Next up, Section 4, Modern Theory, Dynamic Systems.
Okay, so the neoclassical era added some much-needed humanity to the workplace, for sure. But it still mostly looked at the organization in isolation, kind of like it was in a bubble. We can visualize the modern era's shift using systems theory, which was pioneered by Norbert Wiener. We stop looking at organizations in a vacuum and start seeing them as open, living systems that are deeply connected to the outside world. It's this continuous, four-step loop. Step 1. The organization draws inputs, things like money, materials, information, from the external environment. Step 2. It takes those inputs and puts them through an internal process of transformation. Step 3. It releases outputs back into the world in the form of products, services, or even societal satisfaction. And Step 4. The sale or success of those outputs generates feedback, energy, and resources that allow the whole cycle to repeat. It's like the business is constantly breathing in and out with its environment. And building directly on systems theory is the contingency theory of the modern era. This is the realization that because an organization is constantly interacting with its environment, there is absolutely no one-size-fits-all approach to management. Actually, let me rephrase that. An organization's design must be strictly contingent upon outside factors, like what technology is currently available, what's the economic climate doing, what is the social ecology. A truly successful organization has to be highly adaptable to these specific, ever-changing situational factors.
Finally, Section 5, Contemporary Organizational Issues. So what does this all mean for us right now, today? Let's bring this explainer into the present and look at how these historical shifts tackle the realities of our modern workplaces. This comparison perfectly summarizes how far we've come. Look at the past view under classical models. Technological change was usually implemented by fear. Learn this new machine or you're fired, right? Today, it's done through consultation with employees. In the past, a job was just for basic subsistence. Remember the whole economic man thing. Now, contemporary organizations actually strive to make the job a satisfying, enriching experience. Planning used to be this frantic reaction to a crisis. Now, it's a formalized, strategic process. And perhaps the biggest shift. The goal has evolved from pure, ruthless profiteering to generating profit while maintaining deep social responsibility. The crucial takeaway here is that a truly successful modern organization consolidates the structure of the classical era, the empathy of the neoclassical era, and the extreme adaptability of the modern era.
Which brings us to a final question I want you to really think about. Based on everything we've uncovered today, take a hard look around your own workplace. Is your organization built for the past? Is it functioning like a rigid, bureaucratic machine that totally ignores the human element? Or is it successfully adapting to the future, thriving as a dynamic, open ecosystem that values consultation, employee satisfaction, and continuous feedback? Because, as we've seen, the evolution of organizational theory isn't just a history lesson. It is quite literally the blueprint for where we are working tomorrow. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.